Like I say, my name is Emma, and I'm very proud to say that I am a second generation miller. And I'm very pleased that, I don't know if I was asked to talk or whether I suggested that I would talk anyway. I'm very pleased to be speaking here with you this morning, so thank you very much for asking me or letting me inflict myself upon you. And I wanted to talk about watermilling in the present day, and I put a little add-on of more than just a beautiful building. And the reason that I've said that is because I get so many people who come to the mill and they say, oh, what a beautiful building. And they don't actually think that it is anything more than just a beautiful building. So I'm here this morning to tell you that it is more than a beautiful building, very much more than a beautiful building. Can you think of any reasons that it may be more than a beautiful building? It is going to be an interactive talk, so you can speak to me. Anybody got any ideas of what I do in Avelin?
Mill flour. I
mill flour. Absolutely. It is a food producing building. Anything else?
Water control.
It is water, so it's renewable energy.
It's fantastic equipment.
It has fantastic equipment, absolutely true.
Hand built.
And building, indeed.
Not hand built machinery.
And machinery, yes, indeed. Hand-built machinery, yes, yes. So, as it says up here, they're often thought just of historical buildings, and they're not often thought as food producers of this century. It's not only a beautiful building, it is an enormous machine, and I can't tell you how many people come into the mill and say, do you live here? They haven't seen that actually each floor, it's a 3-storey building, each floor is actually used for milling. They should be celebrated for their role within the local community as a source of local food, employment, community and renewable energy. So, you know, you've got lots of these things correct. Traditional mills are irreplaceable as part of our national heritage, and they form not only a role in the history of food engineering, but also in technology. I may have to ask Mel to come up here and just do this, but no. So, just as a little context for this talk, I thought I might Google what watermillers looked like in the 1800s. And some of you may recognise these people. These are Anne and Andy Parry, who actually mill in Vellingannon, and they are other watermillers, not from the 18th century. There did come up some other mills that, when I did Google that. One was Bechuldra Mill, and it was of, is his name Matthew? Was his name Matthew? Bechuldra Mill? Yes? There was a picture of him, his wife and a child. They're no longer milling there, and they've actually been thrown out of the Traditional Coal Millers Guild. And there was a picture of a man dressed in a vest top in beautiful Technicolor, so obviously not from the 18th century. So I thought I'll look a bit closer. So I googled watermillers 2025 UK, and this is what came up. You can see many watermillers there. This person is obviously doing some band. You've got a can of beer, I suggest. Midlands Mill Group, they came up very well. Sadly, the Welsh mills didn't. Again, Bechuldra Mill, a bag of their flour. These people in the bottom, in the middle, they came up a lot. And I think it's just because they do something with water somewhere in the Midlands. And then this mill comes up an awful lot if you Google anything about watermills. But nothing of any watermills that are actually milling today. And I think what it shows is that possibly water and windmills aren't in everybody's psyche. Certainly not Google's. I didn't get this picture, which is actually my father. And it stood outside of Avelin, our watermill, with William, who was at that time one of his apprentices. And I think I didn't get this up because this is actually entitled Self-Employed Man Michael Hall stands outside of his building. So it didn't even say that it was outside a watermill. So to be able to tell you how I mill now, I think I need to just go back a little bit into how things came to be. So here's a vellin as it was when my parents bought it in 1977. It hadn't actually been used as a working mill since 1926, when the miller at that time, Evan Gwyn, died. And his widow closed the mill up, and it was just left to its own devices. As my dad wrote in 1986, Roland Rat had been very busy in there, as had the woodworms. And Mum and Dad went under a lot of research when they first started to look at the mill, and lots of friendships were formed, many of whom are sitting in here in this room today. It was described as a common mill of the very best kind. And I can tell you why, if you want to know. Do you want to know why it was called a common mill of the very best kind? Okay, so in 1925, William Webley Parry, who was one of the owners back in the day, wrote, so he was obviously thinking about renovating the mill at that time in 1825, and that's when the top floor of the mill was actually built on. And he wrote, "It will be impossible to go to the expense of a French mill. It will certainly not answer to the lay of £500. It will be requisite to have very good, well-seasoned timbers and some iron wheels, which now increased double its price. The price is now wonderful. And therefore, we must be satisfied, I fear, to make it a common mill of the very best kind." And my dad wrote in 1986 that he thought it must be a common mill of the very best kind because the timbers and the machinery had survived all those years, so 161 years that it survived, before my dad even started his renovation. Mum will agree with me when I say the reason that Mum and Dad bought the mill wasn't because they wanted to save a mill. They weren't even thinking about milling. The only thing they were thinking about was not having neighbours, because our house is adjacent to the mill. My dad was the eldest of 6, my mum's the eldest of 5, and they were used to having people popping in and out of their houses when we lived in North Wales. So when we moved down to Pembrokeshire, where the mill is situated, my dad didn't want any neighbours, and so he thought, well, if I buy the mill, because he'd already bought the land, which was the pond, then he wouldn't have to have neighbours. So it wasn't something that he bought to do it up. They bought it as an adventure. The fact that they actually did the mill up and create it into a place where they produced flour was more of a happy coincidence than anything else. When my dad did start his renovations in 1979, there were actually an awful lot of mills that were producing flour in Wales. In fact, there were 6 in Dyfed. We were in Dyfed at the time. There were 6 in Dyfed at that time. And people actually said to him, why are you bothering to renovate yet another mill? Now, do any of you have any ideas how many working wind or water mills there are in Wales at the moment, working, producing flour?
Four.
Single figures?
Four.
4. There are actually 3. And this summer, I was the only flour-producing watermiller in Wales, because the other 2 had no water, because they are fed, by a river, and we're lucky enough to be fed by a stream that comes into a pond, and the pond maintains its water. And the other 2 mills that are surviving are Talgarth Mill in Brychynau. I can never remember that. What is it? Brychynau? Baniau Brychynau. Is that right? Brychynau. Baniau Brycheiniog, thank you. And Llanrysted, Fellinganol. little notes. I'm just making sure that I've covered everything. So when my mum and dad bought the mill, this is what their pond looked like. So like I say, the mill had stopped working in 1926, and the pond, which is what you see here, had been filled in 1953, 1954, by what is now known as Camden. And so when Dad started his renovations, the first thing he had to do was to see whether or not he was going to get any water to the mill, because obviously a water mill without water is a bit useless. I mentioned before he was the eldest of 6. He had a number of brothers, and they were sent down one by one from North Wales to dig holes in the field to see where the original walls were and how deep it was. And in one of the things that my dad wrote, he said, "We've only had them back for flying visits ever since." So they obviously didn't enjoy their job that they were put to task to. This is my dad, looking very cheerful at the wheel that he was presented with. So this was a steer wheel, and actually this wheel was sold to the Malors, and they managed to renovate it, and it's actually up and is in full working order. Mum and Dad were living in Iran with my sister and myself before they bought the mill, but sadly the Ayatollah came and stopped everything that we were doing out there, and so when we were evacuated home, my dad lost all his money that he'd got from being in Iran, so he started the mill without any money. He did ask for a small grant from Dyfed Council, and they said, "We will give you a grant, we will give you a 90% grant to do up this mill if you'll turn it into holiday accommodation. But we will give you 0 to turn it into a mill." And their rationale was, nobody would want to buy homemeal flour and nobody would want to go and see a working mill. So my dad, being the man that he was, thought, well, I'll do it anyway. This is the back end where the wheel is, and this is how it looked when Mum and Dad first bought the mill. It was covered in ivy. In fact, the ivy was lifting some of the slates. Some of the ivy was 5 inches in diameter. And the inside, all the machinery had collapsed, and like I said before, it was only the rats that had been busy in there. So it was a lot of work for Dad to undertake. And as I've said before, this is nothing to do with Britain's Got Talent. This isn't our sob story with our gram. This is the reality. Dad had no money to do this mill up, but he had 2 hungry children that were growing, and he had a beautiful wife to support. And so he thought, well, what can I do? There was a furniture maker in the village called Johnny Painter, and he suggested to my dad that he might like to buy a chainsaw or a sawmill, and then he could source his own wood. And so that's exactly what my father did. He bought himself a sawmill. And he had this portable sawmill, and this is what he used to do with it. He used to take it around when he wasn't using it for its actual purpose, and he used to do demonstrations in local country shows or the Eisteddfod. This is Dad on the left-hand side. And he made a business, Dyfed Tree Surgery, and it was that business that actually supported him to be able to do the renovations within the mill. And Mum, and myself and my sister. And this is Dad in 1981 as he stood by his now beautifully renovated wheel and his now working watermill. It only took him a short time to do his renovations. And here he is in different stages of his life, and this packaging that you see down there with him looking very cheerful is the packaging that still remains today. And this is his trusty van and our dog Tess that used to go around once a week, every Friday, to all the little shops in Pembrokeshire that used to take his flour. Tess was a fantastic dog, but that's another story. And then in 2017, I was living up in North Wales, in Bangor, and I had come home to a wedding, and I thought, maybe Mum and Dad need a little bit of help in the mill. So I decided that I would come home and help. And the only reason that Dad allowed me to come home, I was working as a nurse, was because I said that I'd only take a sabbatical and I'd just come for a year. So he thought that that was okay. I came in the January of 2017, and by the June, he said to me in the mill, "I think, maybe you should stay a bit longer." And I haven't left. Dad taught me everything that I possibly needed to learn as a miller, and I was very fortunate because he did that over the first 6 months that I was home. After that, he got bored and decided that I should take it on myself. And actually one day, which stays in my memory very, very strongly, I turned the mill on and I was having a bit of problem with the flour, and I went running into my dad, who was sitting reading a book, and I said, Dad, you've got to come to the mill, there's something terrible that's happened to the mill. I always think I'm breaking the mill. You've got to come and see. And he slammed his book down and he said, there was nobody there to help me when I had something that was problematic. So after that time, I decided I would only go to him when I actually needed something that was really, really difficult. But he was a very, very good teacher. And I have to say that when I was milling and my dad was there, it was an absolute adventure. This is the pond in the middle, as you see it today. This is me hanging out of the middle floor of the stone floor, looking over the wheel, and this is our packaging that's still there. So when I came home in 2017, everything was easy, I have to say. Milling with Dad was fun, and he was there to hand to answer all of my very, very endless questions. The grain that we had was delivered from the 2 farms that my dad had been working with for many, many years. I did joke with him that he would only use places that started with Sutton, because we had the non-organic grain that came from Sutton, Scotney, down near Winchester, and we had the organic and biodynamic grain that came from Sutton, Bonington, just outside of Loughborough. All the maintenance problems, well, they were just sorted because either my dad could fix them or he knew somebody that could, and so he was there to advise. His customers kept coming and they were very pleased that there was somebody else in the mill, so the door was open and there was somebody in the mill, and they kept buying the flour. And our bread that we had every single day and had done since 1985 was provided for us by Queen's Bakery in Cardigan. Do you all know where the mill is? I haven't said that. Yes, good. I'm just fiddling with my notes here a minute. I just have to tell you about this picture. I've chosen this picture very deliberately. Now, my sister isn't here, but I do put it up just to be a bit mean to my sister. This was a beautiful day that we had when we were living in Iran. This is my father. He has a hat on. He did have a lot of good hair, but this is actually a hat, not his hair. And this is me as a little moppet. And we were on a camel. My sister hates this picture because she never actually got to ride on the camel because she was too busy riding on a donkey. So that's why I put this picture up. And then COVID hit. My father died. Grain prices skyrocketed because we had the war in Ukraine. And just if I can give you a little bit of an example of the prices of grain. When I came home, we had non-organic grain, as I say, from Sutton and Scotney. That was at £176 a tonne. When the war in Ukraine came, I rang the farmer and I said, could I buy some grain? He said, certainly, but it's gone up in price. It's gone up to £379 a tonne. When I actually bought the grain, which was a few months later, he said, it's a good job that you managed to secure the grain when you did, because the price is now £600 a tonne. This is for non-organic grain. When I first came home, we used to buy spelt in ton. We used to get them in bags, but they came by tonne. And that was roughly between £600 to £800 a tonne. Today, we will spend up to £2,000 on a tonne of spelt. So the grain prices have skyrocketed. And it turns out the mills are very expensive to maintain. Now that I haven't got my dad there, just to do what he would do, brute force and ignorance was a lot of the things that he used to say to me. I have to get local craftsmen in. But I'm very, very lucky because Dad milled from 1981 until I came home in 2017. So we've got a lot of excellent contacts. So what does this mean to me? Well, traditional craftspeople are very difficult to find, but like I say, we're lucky because we've got a good contact, and actually I'm making more and more contacts the more that I'm milling, and the more that people are coming in and they're seeing that the mill is not only working but it's thriving as a mill. The climate is changing. Summers are coming hotter. Like I said earlier this year, Anne and Andy weren't able to mill for I think about 17 weeks. Talgarth Mill weren't able to mill to the point where they've now bought themselves a portable electric mill so they could still produce flour. And one of the millers rang me. They're a community mill. They're run with volunteers and other people that come. So they have a number of millers who are like volunteer millers. And one of the millers rang me and said, have I ever considered buying an electric mill? And I was quite annoyed. Mum was in the car with me when I took the call. And I said, no, it's not something that I have thought of, and it's not something that I will ever think of. We have a traditional mill, and I think we should be proud of that. And I think that we should keep this going as a traditional mill. And just because people can't get flour from a mill because we're short of water, doesn't mean that it's not still a very important building and something that we should cherish and treasure. I said this to him, but he went and bought his mill anyway. And I felt guilty, so I rang Anne and I said, am I being arrogant because I've got a pond, and even though I can't mill for as long, I can still mill whenever I want to? And she said no. She and Andy had the same conversation. Should they think about buying one of these mills? And they decided no, that they also wanted to be a traditional mill and continue that tradition. And I'll go on more about that in a minute. Food is costly. People know that it's costly. People don't quite understand the price of grain is costly, and that's why my prices of flours has had to go up quite significantly. People are less happy to eat non-organic food. They want to eat organic produce. And milling is very, very hard. It's not something that you can just go into and just enjoy the adventure, as I did when I first came home. So what does this mean? Well, we're very, very lucky here in Wales. We've got Anne and Andy Parry, and Anne Parry has been instrumental in organising and setting up and keeping going the Welsh Grain Forum. Now this means that we've got farmers that are interested in growing heritage grain that is suitable for the climate in Wales, and it's also suitable if the climate changes and gets a bit hotter, because heritage wheat has got deep roots and so it'll find water if there's none falling from the sky. Nowadays, people such as Jeremy Clarkson is doing more about farming, and there are more people who don't want to go down the organic route because it's a very expensive thing to do. They want to go into low input farming, or I think they call it regenerative farming or something like that, I can't remember. But low input farming means that you get a non-organic grain that's been grown organically. So I have currently got some of that, and I'm very, very lucky. Although costly grain means more costly flour, people have got a better understanding of what they're buying, and they are willing to spend that extra money. Because if you come and buy a bag of flour from me, I can guarantee you, whatever you make, even if it's a disaster, it will taste far better than if you make the same product with a bag of flour from the supermarket. And the reason for that is the way that we mill it, and we retain all the goodness from the grain within the flour, and it's tasty and it fills you up. I was reading for this, well actually it wasn't for this talk at all, I was reading the other day, and there was an article that came up about nostalgic marketing. Now, when I'm milling, I get so many people who come into the mill and they tell me oh my goodness, this reminds me of when I was a little girl or a little boy, and I used to be able to go into a shop and it smelt like this, or I remember this, my father's father had a farm and the smell was the same. Well, Coca-Cola and Cadbury have capitalised on this. People nowadays are so sick and tired of AI and computer-generated things that they want to go back to the good old days. And if you have a look in the supermarkets and you have a look at Walker's Crisps, they've now gone back to their old packaging that they used to have in the 70s. Cadbury's and Coca-Cola have done exactly the same because people are now spending more on things that remind them of being a child or remind them of when things were a little simpler. And so I think me, as a miller now in 2025, I can capitalise on that. And we're all trying to move to a more regenerative, sustainable and climate-friendly, not only a farming system, but a way that we all live. So it isn't all doom and gloom. So now, to make the mill move forward and bring it more into people's everyday thinking, I've done a lot of soul searching. And I said to Mum, can I just bore you with a story of why I've come up to my last slide? This is my last slide. I've got time. Can I bore you with a story?
Yes.
When my mum and dad started Evelyn, Dad asked for grants. He was refused. Dad asked for help. He got a small grant from CADU, and they allowed him to buy the wheel. So the wheel that we've actually got at Evelyn comes from St David's, and it was the miller there called Di Vellin who sold the wheel to my father. And he was an interesting little fellow. He was only short. He used to wear a flat cap all the time, even when he was sitting at our dinner table having lunch. And he was a coxswain of the St David's lifeboats, and he was also a one-man band. And I also understand that he used to use his water, if he had enough at the end of the day, to generate electricity. And he was one of the first people in St David's, correct me if I'm wrong, Gerasht, that had electricity in his home. Is that correct? I thought so. Anyway, Dad had no help to do at this mill. My mother, you'll be pleased to know, is a very, very good cook, so she could feed him even though we had no money. And at the end of it, when the mill was up and running, CADU came and slapped a listing on it. So it's now a grade 2-star listed building, which has been the bane of our lives. It's protecting the mill, but we will always protect the mill, but it is the bane of our lives. And to try and diversify a little bit and make the mill into something that's more in people's psyche, and so we can use the flour. I didn't tell you, but Queen's Bakery, who'd been supplying us with bread since 1985, actually closed 3-4 years ago. And so we've been without bread until I managed to entice somebody to come and bake for us. I bought myself a pizza oven and made pizzas from our flour, and it's very, very successful. But it was living at the end of the pond, covered in a blue tarpaulin. And Mum and I used to look at it and say, oh, isn't it ugly? So I got, at some expense, a shed built, just to keep this pizza oven in it. And some kind person reported us to planning. Now, I didn't know that you needed planning to build a shed. But we did. We needed planning to build a shed. And so we had this horrible letter from the planning department, and they said, you've got to take that shed down. And it was a very dark day when I had that letter, because I just thought, how could somebody be so mean as to report us to planning? And honestly, I didn't know that we needed planning. Had I known that we needed planning, I would have gone ahead and got planning. The only reason I built that shed was to hide an ugly eyesore. And the shed that we've had built is beautiful. It mirrors the coach house that's opposite. It's built in large, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And it you know, it will, over time, it will blend. In fact, it has blended into the background already. But it made me think, well, if I can't diversify with my flour and my products, how on earth am I going to keep this traditional mill open? And how am I going to keep it alive for all these people that are happy to come and buy the flour and all these people that think it's a beautiful building? It was a very dark day. But it's been one of the best things that I've done, because in my misery, I spoke to a lot of people. I'm not very good at keeping things inside. And from that, it's changed the way that we're going to be thinking about keeping the mill going. We're still going to keep it as a Velin, but what we're going to do is we're developing a community interest company. Because it turns out that people like the mill. It turns out that the villagers in St Dobnells were so disgusted and appalled that somebody had reported us to planning. Not you know, I should have gone for planning. I'm not saying that I shouldn't, but I didn't know. I know that's no defence. But people were so appalled, and they were so encouraging, and they were saying, you can't close the mill, you must do something. And so we're starting this community interest company, and Anne is going to be one of the directors on it. And we're going to be able to go for heritage grants, and we're going to be able to do things like, we have a kiln which my dad did renovate, so it's perfect and it's all ready, but we just can't use it. So we're going to go for a grant so we can get that up and running. So our 3 sets of stones will actually be in full working order once we manage to get the grant. I'm very, very lucky because of Anne and because of all the work that she's done with the Welsh Grain Forum. There are now so many farmers who are growing grain within a very, very, very close proximity to the mill. I this year can mill only local grain, and I don't think that's happened in the whole time that my dad was milling. People are growing grain because they know that they need to do that to try and keep places open, such as the mill, but also that they can have food security, because that's what everybody's going for. We're bringing more events into the mill. Earlier this year I did a talk. I didn't do a talk. I arranged for a talk to be done with our local Gleeblands. He's a farmer, he's a vegetable grower, and he has a farm shop. So he came and did a talk, and we made some food, and we fed all these people, and he talked. So we're going to be doing more of these events at the mill. And we're going to work with other CICs. There's a great CIC called Keggin, and they go into underprivileged places, and they teach about how you can cook, how you can get your own vegetables, grow your own vegetables, and they're teaching people how things can happen. And we're working with them. We're going to get a voucher scheme so that people can actually have a voucher so they can come and buy our flour, but they won't have to spend the full amount of money if they don't need to. We're going to engage more with educational groups, and I am educating bakers that they can bake beautiful bread, cakes, biscuits, scones, anything you like with our flour, and it can taste as, if not better, than if they have it made with horrible supermarket flour. So it turns out that people are genuinely interested in watermills, unlike the Googling that I did to start at this talk. And people genuinely want to eat good food and eat good flour. And people genuinely want to help. So the future for the mill is looking very, very rosy. Now, what I would say is, if anybody here is interested or would like to collaborate with me, or know of anybody that they think that they could put me in touch with, I'll be very grateful to talk to them at the end. This is my dad looking at the wheel. I had these spokes renewed. This is me excited, and this is Mum and Dad. And I'd just like to thank you for listening.